Our guest today is Pastor Stephen Handy, and he told me to call him Stephen, so I will. So as I told you, Stephen, the first couple of minutes we're letting people in. So the other day, I saw you the other day. I was at your church, which is McKendree United Methodist Church, and you did a movie screening. And so I'll tell you what, why don't we hold that, because I thought it was really interesting. We'll hold that for everybody to get on. So are you in your office, or are you at home?
I'm in my home office.
Your home office. All right. So usually, as people know, I ask an irrelevant question at the beginning of this thing. And I usually ask about artwork. And there's a piece of artwork behind your left shoulder. What is that?
Yeah, so part of Black art always uses what I would probably call hope theme. And so there's a Black man reaching down to help another Black man.
Okay.
So
I can't see it that well, but it's okay, I got it. Very good.
That was a gift from one of my friends, because they know I'm all about helping people in general, but particularly right now in this season, Black men who seem to be at a disproportionate level of success and achievement.
Well, I like the painting, and I like the underlying thing to it. I think that's really very, very important. And I see you have a number of books behind your right shoulder. I assume you've read all of those.
I have started all of those.
Okay. All right. I have a lot of books on my shelf, and I have opened the I don't know if I could say that I started all the books, but I know that when I got the book, I opened at least the front to see how long it was, and then put it away. One of these days I will start all the books. I don't know if I'll ever finish any of them. Anything interesting on your bookshelf that you really like?
Well, let me see. I think I picked up something the other day. Let me see if I can find it, because there's another book. Oh, it's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And he proposes that we live a life of hurry. And we've got to stop that, because it creates anxiety and fear and doubt and all those other expressions that keep us not in our best mindset. So it's been a really good read, and I can really relate to it at so many levels. So I'm just grateful for someone who can write something that relates to me, other than me trying to fix the relationship into who I am.
Interesting. I think he probably has a point. We all are pretty much in a hurry all the time. It doesn't allow us time to think and relax a little bit. And I think we maybe we run around too much, and we don't spend enough time dealing or spending time with the people that really are important to us, and doing the things that we really want to do. So anyway, that's my thought today. Yeah.
I tell you, Jim, relearning how to breathe. I think we've forgotten how to breathe. Now, I say that facetiously.
Yeah.
But it's interesting when we go to the doctor says, now take a deep breath, right? Which means that often we're just such in a hurry. We don't appreciate the breath and the depth of the breath and the meaning of the breath and the hope of the breath, because we're so busy getting to the next point. And so we can finish our day with our to-do list, and we've forgotten how to breathe.
Well, my doctor makes me take 3 deep breaths, and then she tells me to go back to my regular breathings. All right, well, let's get started, because I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. Our guest today is Pastor Stephen Handy. He is the pastor at McKendree United Methodist Church downtown. We've got a couple of people I wanted to recognize. I know that our county clerk, Brenda Wynn, is on the call. Welcome, Brenda. She's a regular visitor on this. I think Linda McFadden Ketchum had signed up. I know that she has been so involved in terms of dealing with situations around gun violence that I'm glad she's on the call. And I saw Mike Hodge is on the call, the head of NOAA. And and there are probably some other people that I'm sure someone will tell me in just a minute, but and it's a kind of a gloomy day outside. I think it's supposed to get to the 90s again. It's kind of nice to have that type of relief for just a little while. And I do have some sad news to pass along. I know that former council member Vernon Winfrey passed away, I believe, last night. And so our thoughts and prayers go out to his family today. All right, so let's, we haven't had a call in the past 2 weeks, and obviously timing of having Pastor Handy on the call is very important. And we've obviously had the Highland Park situation out of near Chicago on the 4th of July. And Pastor Handy, I'm going to ask you my main question in just a minute, but at the council meeting on Tuesday night, we took a moment of silence for Highland Park, but I believe there were at least 9 other mass shootings in America on July 4th. So, this is a pretty sad and scary times. So I will recognize Councilmember Gloria Hauser is also on. So welcome, Councilmember Hauser. So let's just get into this. Okay, so my first question, Stephen, always to all my guests is, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into this role as head of McKendree United Methodist Church and become kind of at least a spokesman or a leader on some of these issues we're going to talk about?
Well, I'm a Bayou boy, born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Families from Louisiana, both sides, mother and father, and so I have deep roots in Louisiana. My father was a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. My great-grandfather was a pastor, and so I didn't want to be a pastor. And so we moved to Nashville when he integrated the United Methodist Publishing House as the first African-American executive ever, and that was in 1970. And so we loved Nashville for 7 or 8 years, and then I moved back to New Orleans to go to school at Dillard University and HBCU, and then moved back here because I love Nashville and been back here working for a company you all may remember, Service Merchandise. And I was in marketing and sales for a while until we eventually went bellied up, or what I call bankrupts, and decided that maybe there was something else I needed to do. But in the midst of that, I started going to Vanderbilt Divinity School, got an MDiv, and decided that ministry would be cool, but I didn't want to be with grown folks. So I did youth ministry until Doug Meeks, my advisor, said, stop playing with children and grow up. And so he told me I needed to be ordained in the Methodist Church. And I fought that until I decided I would probably need to do that. So I got appointed to a church in Lebanon, Tennessee for about 5 years. And it was a monoculture church when we started, and became a multicultural, intergenerational, interracial church. And so my bishop, we get appointed to churches in the Methodist Church, decided that McKendree would be a nice fit for me. The challenge was with McKendree at that point was 99% white and 1% persons of color. But today we are about 35% persons of color. And so we continue to evolve into this mosaic of broken pieces that looks like the kingdom of God when we decide to be together. So I've been downtown going on year 13 now, and I love the urban core. I don't know if I could survive in a suburban church or rural church, but those who are on the line, some of our McKendreeites can tell you there is nothing like McKendree. My 2 children went to college, and they were looking for their beloved McKendree, and they couldn't find it. And so I told them to start one. And so they started with their friends. They started eating together, reading the biblical text together, discussing and deciding what they were going to do about it. And they were asking the so what. So I'm here. I love this city. This city has some tremendous opportunities and yet a whole length of challenges. But if we're not in the thick of that, I can't sit on the sidelines and talk about it. So that's where I am, and that's who I am, married to Shelley, and we will celebrate our 31st wedding anniversary on August 31st. And by the way, I'll put a little asterisk next to that. I never wanted to be married. And I'll just leave that right there, Jim.
Okay, I'm not gonna follow up on that. So you're married for 31 years, and you're a pastor of a church, even though you also didn't want to be a pastor either. Okay, so good. Okay, so now that we've got that straight, I had two questions. One is that my wife's family is all from Gonzales, Louisiana. Do you know where Gonzales?
Yes, I sure do.
It's the jambalaya capital of the world. And I have been there. So I haven't been there in a long time, but I've been there several times. And I've been in Baton Rouge. The other thing, I don't know the definition. So I'm always learning on these programs. When you say monocultural, what does that mean in terms of the
so
church?
most churches in America are what I would call segregated still.
Okay.
Martin King said, I think in 1967, that the 11 o'clock hour on Sunday is still the most segregated hour in the week. It's still true today. So when I say monoculture, I mean that there's a culture embedded in that environment that typically is a one perspective culture. It's dominated by a one race group of people.
Okay.
It's dominated by one gender. So there's a monocultural perspective. What we contend and what I believe is that when we can diversify our portfolios, when we can say we're a multicultural group of people, then the perspectives widen and we become more solution-centered than debating about everything. Now, the difficulty of that, Jim, is most churches don't know how to do that. And because they've done monoculture so long, they're comfortable with it. So just recently, there was a church, a Southern Baptist church, I believe, that an African-American walked in and the person's greeting them said, what are you doing here? And she called her colored. And she said, I'm not colored. Where'd you get that language from? She says, that's the language that we use here. And I thought, this is 2022. And that's a monocultural church that has decided to live in that level of comfort. So anyone who comes from the outside, not to disrupt it, but to integrate it and not be what I would probably call assimilation. How do we accommodate the gifts and the graces of people in a workplace, in a market called America that is now 40% people of color, and by 2050, this majority culture will be the minority culture, and we're not ready for it.
So this brings up all kinds of different questions, which would probably take a series of lectures. But I guess maybe the easiest question or maybe the hardest question to bring about is, how do you change that perspective? So you've done it at McKendree. You've made it more look like the city of Nashville. It's no longer a monocultural facility, even though it may have been at one time. How do you do that? How do you encourage churches, all religious faiths to do that? And then the follow-up question would be, particularly in the example you gave, the head of the church. If a church decides that they want to be monocultural, is that kind of acceptable? I guess it happens. It happens all over the place. But how do you encourage people of different faiths or different cultures to become a part of your congregation?
So one of the questions that we raise and that I often talk about is, what does the kingdom of God look like? And so if God is trying to get the kingdom on earth so that earth can look like the kingdom, then what does the kingdom of God look like? I contend it doesn't look like one group of people. It doesn't look like one class of people, one race of people, one language of people. It's all of those who have the audacity to believe that we are better together. So by the mere fact that the bishop thought it was a good idea to put the first African-American in the mother church of Methodism blew my mind, because he thought something different could happen there. I probably never would have done that on my own. because what happens in those environments, you have to be there a long time. So in the Methodist Church, we're usually appointed for 2 to 3, 4 years, and then we move. We're itinerant pastors. So in order to change a culture, it takes 7 years. So if we're moving pastors every 3 to 4, guess what? Churches have this wonderful opportunity called reset. They know how to reset their culture. In monocultural churches, it's 7, but if you're trying to do a cross-racial, multicultural church, it takes 10. I've been at McKendree 13. So we saw some of that unraveling, and that's a wonderful word for me. We saw some of that unraveling when Obama was elected, and they used me as kind of the picture of, oh, so we've got an Obama guy in our pulpit on Sunday. Well, I didn't hear it maybe the way they intended. I said, isn't God wonderful the way diversity works? And so my presence, by the mere fact of people walking in, says, oh, I can see myself. The other part of that is you have to do a staff reorientation. Your staff has to look like who you want to become. I tell people all the time, the new front door is your website. And so I go on websites often out of curiosity just to see their staff members. And if their staff members are one kind of race of people, to me, it says volumes. So I spend a lot of time on downtown streets in Nashville, even today, gathering, meeting people, sharing. And so one, I think it was one Thursday, Jim, and this cracks me up. Visitors walked in our front door and they said, can we see the pastor? And I said, can you hold just one moment?
They asked you? They came in
me.
You, okay.
Yeah, they asked me, could I go get the pastor?
Okay.
So I walked in my office and I was with my administrative assistant. I said, let me just stand here for about 15 seconds. Then I walked back out and I said, welcome, my name is Stephen Handy. I'm the lead pastor here. And their eyes kind of opened really wide, and they did breathe, by the way. And I said, it is so good for you to be here. So part of our strategy was around, we wanted to make sure we were connecting with the people in downtown, particularly first level were our homeless, what we call our neighbors. And so about 20% of our congregation often reflects a homeless flavor. And one who used to sleep on our steps joined church last Sunday and will be baptized soon, because we believe that our church has to reflect diversity, inclusiveness, and also equity. And we believe that that view looks like justice, because we serve a God of justice. Yes, a God of grace, a God of love, but we often don't talk about God as a God of justice. So it's an ongoing thing. And the people come to us, they'll look around and go, this is really different. And we say, continue to allow it to be different. Bring your uniqueness to this fold, and we guarantee you, we will accept you the way you are.
So let me ask you this. Maybe this has been on my mind for as long as I've been a little kid. So I grew up in East Tennessee in Johnson City, and Johnson City seemed to be a place where everybody just got along. It was fine. But I always, growing up, I thought churches were places where not only did they practice religion, but they also opened their doors to people to help. Part of the thing that they were supposed to do was to help everybody, help one another. So how do you kind of understand or comprehend the idea that that some churches don't open their doors? So you gave me that example before about the lady who just walked in, and it's like, what are you doing here? It's like, I thought churches are supposed to be all welcoming. They're supposed to open their doors to people. Tell me how I'm supposed to try to understand why some churches maybe don't feel like they are supposed to open their doors.
Well, I think it really, for me, is a clear indication of supremacy. And many times that supremacy is deeply embedded in the culture of that community, not just the church, but in that community. So in Nashville, as an example, you've got 4 quadrants. You got downtown, and then you got north, south, east, west. There are parts of the city, even today, North Nashville, that they built an interstate system through between 69, 70, 71, because what they were saying was, we don't really care about your community. This is really about economic development. This is about the way we want to see this city, and your voice doesn't matter. So I think the church is countercultural at best on a good day, and it has to check itself. It has to hold itself accountable. But when you have leaders who believe they're in charge, that their supremacy, particularly in America now, their white supremacy gets to dictate the order of the day, then those of us who say no have to speak up. Those of us who say no have to vote. Those of us who say no have to engage people who want to walk together. We have to create a huge eraser to start to erase the prejudice, the bias, and we all bring that, right? We all bring bias, sometimes it's unconscious, and we all bring prejudice. But at the end of the day, what we found at McKendree is people are looking for an alternative. They are so hopeless, and they are so angry and so disappointed in the American way. If they can find a place where two things happen. They belong before they have to believe. Now that's critical. So at McKendree, we don't invite you to believe what we believe. At McKendree, we invite you to establish a belief that we believe will align with us over time. Now, it doesn't have to. We don't kick you out. Belonging, and then the other one is intimacy. People are looking for intimate relationships of truth and transparency. And I don't find that in many places in Nashville, but we say McKendree is one of those, so how do we replicate it? So we're in a process of now creating these micro communities of up to 30 people throughout the city, because we have decided that McKendree will always be there and people can walk in the front door, the back door. But if we believe in intimacy and belonging, that happens in smaller groups. So I think one of the ways that we can shift the culture in Nashville is to create these smaller micro communities throughout the city that you get to invite people in, because once you've established a culture, you get to decide who's locked out, who comes in. But if you started with a diverse mindset, a diverse ideology, a diverse perspective, then it grows organically and it invites those differences to come in and belong and have intimacy.
All right. So tell me about these 30-person groups. Where are they? And if
so we started one in 12th South in the Cookery. I don't know if you all know where the Cookery is. It's a great culinary restaurant. They do training for homeless men and women. A good friend of mine, Brett, the owner and dreamer of that. We started that about a year before COVID. And what we did is there were a core group of about 3 of us, and we invited some folk who were not church folk. And we said, we're trying to design an alternative to what happens on Sunday morning. And we want to make sure that it's not on Sunday, but it's during the weekday. And we want to have a meal. We want to have open conversation. We want to talk about the way of Jesus, because the way of Jesus was important for us. And then we want to have a missional engagement component. So we met and we met and we met, and we maxed out on the first floor of the Cookery, and then COVID hit. And so we had to retreat to online, which is not the same, but it is a way. And we're actually going back. I met with Brett yesterday, and we're about to reestablish that. And then there's a downtown restaurant, and I can't ever think of its name, but it's a plant-based restaurant. He's invited us to start a micro community in that place. So it always has to be around tables and with chairs. So the whole structure of Sunday morning is this one-dimensional, everybody face forward, and you get to hear one voice. There's no preaching in this. There's only collaborative conversations that we build commonality, and then we decide what are we going to do as a result of it.
All right, let me ask you one other question, and then we'll get into more topics. But I find this really, really interesting, particularly because I've had lots of discussions with people about how do you bring people together? How do you, in a time of serious divisiveness, how do you get the conversation started? So here's my question to you. So I'm guessing, and I may be wrong on this, but the 30 people or the people that are coming together for this are interested in engaging and understanding and learning. how do you get the people who really are not there? How does this, is the idea to this to keep growing until people start going like, you know what, I'm tired of this divisiveness. I think I want to be a part of a more inclusive, and the word you used, intimate group, because that makes me feel better. Is that where this is headed?
That's the impetus of this group, because what we decided, thank you, Danny, it's called the Copper Branch on Church Street. One of my members just sent me a text.
I got it.
So what we've decided is if we plant one in downtown, downtown's going to be the incubator. And what we're not trying to do is create another level of professionals. So I'm considered a professional. I'm ordained clergy, right? I'm going, no, that's not the way. For me, every movement that starts in the margins. We have a tendency to believe that movements start from the top. Well, the guy I follow, whose name is Jesus, always started movements from the margins. And so we're going to plant in downtown Nashville, then we're going to go north, south, east, west. No more than 30. When we get more than 30, we invite half of that group to go start another group. And so we're moving away from this monument orientation of come to church to be in the marketplace where there's movement. Once we solidify Nashville, then we're going to Chattanooga. We're going to plant in Chattanooga. Once we go to Chattanooga, we're going to Knoxville. Once we go to Knoxville, we're going to Jackson. And then we're going to cross over and go to Georgia. And so in the next 10 years, we hope to plant about 2,000 of these micro communities that will reorientate how we see each other, but more importantly, how we love and support each other. And what we found is most people don't know this exists. And so they've retreated to what they know. And they say, this church thing that you all do, you all don't love people, so I'm out. And we say, well, wait a minute. We've got something that we're not calling church. We're calling community. And we want to invite you to be a part of it. It starts with a meal. And what we do know that Jesus spent a disproportionate amount of time around tables than he did in the synagogue.
Got it. Well, count me in. I think you're on to something.
We'd love to have you. So what part of the city do you live in?
I live in Green Hills. So,
okay. So
but I can come downtown.
Let's look for a place in Green Hills, Jim. So we can start in Green Hills. And I'm sure some of my church members are already saying, yes. I'm getting some texting. Hold on, let me read this. I'm sorry.
Are the members of the microgroup similar in their politics and outlook, or are there members with very different views?
Part of the core value of micro communities is we value difference.
Yeah.
So we're never looking for people who think the way we think. Chances are if we do that, then we will morph into what already exists, and we're refuting that.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you. We're going to get into gun violence in just a minute, because that's where most of the questions came in over the week. But I did see you the other day. You showed a movie called No Vacancy, which was about homelessness, and in a I don't know. I was going to ask you a question. Now I'm thinking that I'm not going to ask you. Well, okay. I'll go ahead. As I get older, I'm interested because I was out one night doing canvassing with Open Table Nashville. You know, and you see lots of people who are experiencing homelessness sleeping on the streets. Sometimes you'll see people sleeping on church balconies, you know, or the front of the porch. And it was like, wasn't Jesus basically homeless? You know, he was moving around. And then you go, in today's world, would churches let Jesus in, even though they're practicing a faith built all around him? But would they let him in the door? And so that was my question. I've always wondered that. So how do you answer?
I think it's a layered question, and we don't have 30 minutes left, so I'm just going to tip my toe in this.
Okay.
Jesus was not often appreciated in the synagogues where he preached. We have a couple of episodes where he preached, and one was they pushed him off a cliff, and they weren't successful, right? The other was some money changing because they were doing fundraising and selling goods and services. So we only have 2 or 3 episodes of Jesus actually in the synagogue. Most of his life was in the marketplace around who? People who were not invited to the synagogue. So I contend that one of the things that the church has to do, because guess what, Jim, the church has more unused space than any other entity or institution in America. We use it on Sunday. We may use it on Wednesday for Bible study. But for the most part, those spaces sit dormant. And we decided to give our church away about 10, 11 years ago and leverage all of our space for people who wanted to be in mission with us. And so we took a space called Room in the Inn, and we have refurbished that space, and now it's called the Foundry. And we house up to 8 men in transitional housing, because guess what? We have the space. And the challenge is all of these churches, there's 700 churches in Davidson County. Now, that doesn't include mosques or synagogues, right? 700 Christian churches. If those 700 decided to do something different with their space, homelessness goes away to a large extent. Now, there are a multiplicity of issues with our displaced neighbors on the streets. I guarantee you, I'm clear about that. But we do a 5 and 2 meal every Tuesday. And in the 13 years that we've done the 5 and 2 meal, we've only had 2 incidents of fighting. 2 in 13 years, because we treat people with dignity. And because we all have trauma, we try not to trigger their trauma. How do you know what their trauma is? You sit down and have a meal. You ask them about their history. You call them by their name. You don't walk past them on the streets of downtown Nashville. You stop. And in the midst of stopping, you get to really be transformed yourself.
I got so many more questions about this, but you and I will talk one day about this. All right, thank you. I've always wanted to ask somebody that question, and I just figured it was time. So thank you for answering. Okay, so let's talk about gun violence and what your role has been, what it is now, and where you see us going in terms of gun violence. Because I mean, you start with the premise, particularly in Nashville, that I was looking at the state law the other day. The legislature has the city blocked from doing anything. Any city across the state cannot create their own gun laws. So taking that as a premise, what are we doing, and where do you see us going?
Well, let me first of all kind of go back to Americans' history with our indigenous brothers and sisters, our siblings, and to realize that gun violence is part of the American fabric. And that's unfortunate. We've stripped away cultures of people. And so we have decided that we're going to be the big brother of the day. And so this violence is historical. So it's not anything that happened recently. It's something that continues to happen. And what I've always said is violence is often perpetrated when there is deep levels of fear. And guess what? We have these cycles in America of deep levels of fear. I remember about 11, 12 years ago when the first mass killing was on the map in the city, and we lit a candle. We lit a candle for that person and for the shooter and for those families. And then I realized, every week I could light a candle. And I said, no, we're not going to create that environment. We're going to do something. And so one of the things that I often say is, if you want reform, language is important. So when you talk about racism, for most people, when you use that word racism, cholesterol rate goes up, heartbeat rate goes up. And so you have to be careful, not to say you shy away from the issue, but you reframe it in a way that people want to come around a table and talk about it. So if I can't get you around the table because I'm always blasting you with certain language, and I'm a theologian, so language is critical. What if we said, let's talk about gun reform and gun safety versus jumping head in to gun violence? See, even for me, I'm hearing that language at a high level of anxiety, because My father had to talk with me, and I often would ask my other colleagues who were white. I said, "Did you have a talk with your boys?" Since we had boys, and they said, "The sex talk." I said, "No, no, 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 no. It's the other talk. It's a talk where you have to tell your boys, if you get stopped in Nashville by a police officer, here's what I need you to do. I need you to walk through every step you're going to take before you take it. I don't need you to be angry and mad. I don't need you to tell them who you are and show your strength. I need you to come home and we can talk about it. You can be angry at home. I don't need you to make any short moves that would cause a police officer to be afraid of you." And we created this fear factor around critical race theory, replacement theory, all these theories that don't have any grounding, no grounding, because we've made these stories up to create fear, those against us. And what I contend, if often we can see the humanity in all of us, but Jim, part of our history is we didn't see the humanity in all people. God created us in the image of God's self. Well, we say that, but the distortion of that is we really don't believe it. And so we think God is this color and God is of that color and God is on the side of this class and God's against this class. So the distortion starts in Genesis. And so what to do is reframe, revisit, and say, well, who is God and why did God create? And so you have these issues around people of color, especially in Nashville. You look at any parts of any city, metropolitan city, north and east are often the underinvest, underdeveloped parts of the city. West and south are those parts that are overly invested, right? So you look at Nashville, I'm from North Nashville. You look at North Nashville and you go, well, wait a minute. Where's the investment? Because North Nashville is the last gentrifying tract in the city, the last one. Now, some have been regentrifying on their third cycle. But in North Nashville, which was the Black part of the city, Jefferson Street going back, Clarksville Highway, it's trying to be held by Black people because it's the only place they have left. Gentrification's coming. The question is strategically, how do we get involved in the conversations around gentrification as opposed to being forced out? And so part of that for me is, what is the collaborative mindset that says we care about you? Not only do we care about you, we're going to invest in you. So we're still trying to get over the corridor of 440 and the 40 interstate system coming through Jefferson Street. It's never recovered. And then you have a storm and a hurricane, and it's been dispersed and dilapidated. And then you have these housing experts who come in and buy these properties with pennies on a dollar, and they're redeveloping them. And so what do you do with people who have lived there for decades? They say yes to the buyout. They can't afford to live in Davidson County. And so now they live in Clarksville. And now they live in Hendersonville. And so they're away from their families, their support systems, right? Can't get a bus route. And so what I think we have to do is decide who wants to be a part of this conversation, because we will never get it right. I serve a church who's woefully divided about who's right and who's wrong. And I say, we need to be people of goodness and not people of rightness. And we've been indoctrinated to be right. It's called the educational system, right? I've been trained to be right, Jim. No, I realize I've been trained to be right. I have to decolonize my thinking to realize that I have been positioned by God to be good. And so doing no harm, part of our Wesleyan 3 simple rules, do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. Now, I don't necessarily like the order. I say, if you stay in love with God, you'll do no harm and you'll always do good. The challenge is, do harm to who and why? So part of this whole emphasis around the city of Nashville is we're creating all these subcategories, these sub-teams, and the violence continues to perpetuate because guess what? We've not included the people who have a tendency to be in the throes of that around the table to help us resolve it. Two things I tell people in communities. Communities in and of themselves are intelligent enough to resolve their own issues. The challenge is they don't have access to the resources. They don't have exposure to what's different. And so you build a system that has poor schools. You build a system that has desert in terms of grocery stores. You build a system that says you people are devalued, and then generationally, the generational poverty, right, is hard to get out of. And all of a sudden you want to say you're on even playing ground, and I'm 40 years behind the race.
Right,
So
but if we're behind on all these things, I admit, and I think you're spot on, and on the, you know, where the development is going and what it's going to be, and developers from outside the city come in and buy up, you know, homes and then turn the neighborhood into something that it wasn't, and then people have to be forced to move. We have to deal with that. I get that, but while we're trying to figure that one out and trying to deal with the fact that resources haven't been invested in certain areas where they should have been, we've got a situation, obviously, in America where, you know, it's all kinds of people get to the point where they just go, they can get easy access to automatic weapon, and they can unfortunately kill and hurt lots of people. And the devastating impact on those communities is, I mean, it's just horrible. And we've had it here. So what do we do? I mean, how do we start having conversations? How do we get this issue to the, I mean, it's right in front of us, yet we can't move, it seems. I mean, obviously you have you know, the president just signed in a major piece of legislation. That's a good start, but we got a long ways to go, and we need to move quickly to figure this out.
So policy has a lot to do with it. And I tell people, the conversations I have, you can't have a conversation with me if you don't vote. So most of us vote in the presidential election, and then we're done. When we know, well, maybe we don't know. Maybe there's an assumption that we know. Most of politics is local. And so we who are registered voters can decide who we want in. And here's a challenge, because I've been part of Nashville for over 45 years. We elect people and don't hold them accountable. I mean, think about that. Who else, what other country elects people and then walks away for 2 years or walks away for 4 years until there's a reelection? And once you're elected, you spend your next 2 years trying to get reelected. And there's not a report card, although I believe places like NOAA, and I'm glad Mike's on the call, they have a report card. But the average person in Nashville is not affiliated with any of these organizations. And they don't know the pathway to justice. They don't understand that they have the right to hold people accountable. So imagine in this city that every public elected official got a report card. I'm talking from judges to council people. They got a 6-month report card. Now, I've worked in business a long time. They used to do annual reviews. Then they went to quarterly reviews. My behavior changed, Jim, with a quarterly review, because all of a sudden I knew that there was a different level of accountability. So our neighbors downtown, and the reason we've not had violence is because we hold them accountable. We said, these are the principles that we practice in this place. We've allowed politicians to have free reign of everything they desire. And so when there are budget discussions, the question is, who's around those tables when we're talking about budgets? Is it only public elected officials? Probably yes. Why is that? Because we've created lines. Well, guess what? We need a big human eraser that says, you know what? We're not going to behave like this anymore. And as I said earlier, most movements start from the ground floor, from the margins. And I think one of the things that we need to do is what we did a week ago Tuesday. We invited business leaders, we invited government officials, we invited nonprofits, we invited faith communities, and we invited our displaced community members to say, we want you to be a part of the solution. Now, you can't have 300 people in a room trying to make a decision. But
Right.
you have to have a representation of the people who can make the decisions and the people who can help those decision makers see differently, have a different perspective, a broader perspective, a different ideology. And the challenge with that is they have to figure out how to spend more time in the marketplace than sitting around legislative tables debating about what's wrong.
All right. So I'm thinking through all these different points that you're making. Yeah. There's always been this conversation, at least, about how most citizens in Nashville hopefully know who their council member is. Okay. And they know who their mayor is. And so they know that they have access, if they have a pothole, if they have, if there's dogs barking down the street, if we got complaints about fireworks, they know how to find us, and you can find us all fairly quickly. State legislature, I know, gets covered quite a bit when they're in town, but it's in the newspaper and people don't necessarily read that, or they may get a blip on their, on their phone, but they seem further removed because you don't see them a lot. And most of them don't live in Nashville. They're coming from different parts. And with the our folks in Washington, you feel like you have very little say in that. The only way you have a say is through voting. But I think you're right. I mean, I think you hold us accountable. NOAA, to some extent, holds us accountable. So do other groups. That is important. So how do you take that? If you're going to hold us accountable, how do you get this conversation started with people around the table if they're so blocked out already about whether it's gun safety, gun reform, trying to figure out how to get this thing under control? Besides holding people accountable, how do you get people to engage in the conversation in a way? Because I would hope that everybody in this country does not want to see these things happen. This is horrible. So what do we do? And this is how do we get this thing started? How do we start getting this thing wrestled back down to the ground?
So one of the things that fascinates me and is deplorable is that there are more guns in America than people. Why? Because I think some people believe that their gun can protect them from the shenanigans of everything that's around them that they don't believe is safe. Right. And sometimes that's me. If I walk in the room, they don't see that they can be safe around me unless they are packing, as the young people say, right? They're carrying a gun. My experience, and I can only tell people, I don't give solutions to things, but my experience has been, if you trust me, we can talk about anything. I think there's a deep, deep void of trust in our city and with our public officials. They say one thing. We even seen this at the Supreme Court level. They went through hearings. They said one thing, they get elected, and they behave differently. What I know is that everybody has a perspective. Everybody has an opinion. They don't feel comfortable articulating that opinion with certain people. But if they're invited to other places, they don't realize there are alternatives. And as I told my children when they were looking for a church, I said, create one. And they go, well, we can do that? I said, you can. The church is called 2 or 3 people, right? And so if I can get 2 or 3 people, there are 6 generations in America today. It's the first time we've ever had 6 generations. Do you think those 6 generations agree on everything? No, but there is some commonality. I believe everybody wants flourishing, but the subject matter has to be a connecting subject matter so we can get to the divisive issues. What I believe we have a tendency to do, we want to start with the divisive issues. We have more in common than we don't, but we have a tendency to start with that stuff that divides us. And guess what? That's not going far. So I meet with 3 or 4 generations every week around a coffee table. And the conversations are so widespread that I say we need to do this every week. Now, that's a commitment for me to say, I trust you to have this conversation. And when something happens, I'm out of town, Jim, they will call me and say, we missed our coffee date. So now I'm saying, if you want to have that conversation, can we bring 3 or 4 other people in that conversation? Can we bring 6 or 7 other people? Can we have a conversation in South Nashville, East Nashville, predicated on the neighborhood that you live in? So this idea of us trying to fix Nashville, I don't think we can fix Nashville. I think we can concentrate on our neighborhood. It's called place-based experiences, right? So if I can look in downtown and draw a half a mile radius around downtown Nashville and say McKendree is gonna do what they can in this half mile versus we're gonna impact Nashville. It's overwhelming, but we put a footprint. We got a footprint in downtown Nashville. And now what we're trying to figure out is the framework that we did led us to footprints. Footprints means there's motion. And I have 2 young children who are always asking me, we just got back from New Orleans. They said, why is there so much poverty? Why is there so much divisiveness? And I often have to tell them, I can't answer that question, but it didn't start yesterday. And you have to be a solution in this movement. And so you have to gather people, not necessarily who agree with you, who want human flourishing, who want Nashville to be an inclusive city, who want Nashville to be a city that engages people where they are, who Nashville, who says, by the way, I can't walk across the street on another homeless person because I'm afraid of them. So this whole idea is, who do we value? To me, it's a value proposition. We won't have a conversation unless we have a collective value system. And that collective value system must stem from our lived experiences and push us into those places where we get to take a risk, right? And so I tell people all the time, Nashville is not a unique city. Our problems exist across other metropolitan areas. Who are we partnering with? Who are we developing relationships with? When are we going to erase these lines that say Metro Nashville is Metro Nashville? Why can't Metro Nashville join in with Metro Chicago or Metro Denver? And why can't the politicians figure out how to create solutions to all of this versus creating layers of bureaucracy that won't allow us to have a conversation around homelessness, as an example, around gun violence? We can't use that language. Well, you can't control my tongue, right? I've been to jail. I've been in those places because what we have to say is, what do we stand for? And at the end of the day, what I love about our Jewish brothers and sisters, whatever they do, Jim, they do for the next 2 generations. Whatever we do, we have a tendency to do for the next hour, the next day. And so part of the movie showing was to show people that we can get all of these subsectors together and we don't have to be mad at each other. We can start a conversation. Jesus never healed anybody unless there was a conversation. So conversations create over time commonality. That commonality moves us to strategy. Those strategies move us to alignment with other people so that we change the narrative. If you can change the narrative, you can change the culture. You can change the culture, you can change behavior and patterns of people. And ultimately, McKendree is trying to help people change their patterns of behavior and the way they think.
Okay. Lot to take in. Very, very, I'm writing lots of stuff down. Take, if you bring, if you bring people of different thoughts together, you're looking for commonality. How do we deal with in this country, getting people to understand that some of the things that they truly believe are not necessarily true? And I'm not talking, you can look at, the elections or whatever, but it flows down into so many different things. And what you're trying to do is establish the commonality, but then you're trying to break through so we can actually start engaging in a good conversation. And, you know, it could be that some of the things I believe may not necessarily be true either. So, you know, you have to start with the idea of how do you get past that? How do you build that trust?
Yeah, it takes time. Let me
Yeah.
say that. And most of us don't have time. So I always use the illustration. One of our church members who is now headed to American University to go to law school, she was in another church, and that church had all male leadership. And she was satisfied with that because they were teaching that only male leadership could lead the church. Well, we had coffee one day based on a mutual friend who left that church and joined McKendree. And so we had a conversation. She says, women can't preach. I said, where did you read that? The first preacher was a woman, Mary. She proclaimed the good news of Jesus, right? And she said, well, that's not what I'm taught. So over time, we had coffee week in and week out. She says to me, can I come to McKendree? I said, absolutely. So she comes to McKendree, she gets involved in a small group that diversity, inclusiveness, justice is being served on the menu. She joins McKendree and says, I just never knew this. I wasn't taught this. She's 25 years old. She has now realized that God has deconstructed some things in her life that she has framed as truth. And one of the things that we practice, Jim, at McKendree is you don't have a lock on truth. First of all, you have an semblance of truth, but when you get with other people, that truth can be synchronized. You can develop a broader sense of truth, but we don't have absolute truth. It is always evolving. And so you have to connect with people to understand that truth is evolving. And by the way, God will speak into that over time. So this young lady, and she's a great example, just had coffee with her last week. She was going through Nashville on her way to Chicago back home. So she's going to DC to go to law school this fall, like in 3 weeks. And I remember it took 2.5 years. It took 2.5 years for her to get to that point of deconstruction to where she is now. Or if I decide I can't do coffee with you, I don't have time for you, figure it out on your own. We're not designed to figure things out on our own. We're not designed to figure them out. We're designed to have faith. And that faith should connect our minds first. And then it will evolve our feet, right? We'll start walking together and talking together and dreaming together. And you fill a void that I have that I didn't realize I had. And so all of a sudden now we get all of these sectors together in a room over time, over a meal, yes, over a meal. And then we start talking about the hard stuff because we trust each other. And when you trust each other, you can talk about anything. And when you trust each other, you'll do anything for me. And so I think we've got these sectors that have created fences, built fences around themselves so they can maintain what they think is right. And we got to debunk what is right and who is right. And that takes a great deal of time. Second part of that is in the midst of that transformative experience, I also am growing. And I have to realize, I talk to some of my colleagues and they think they have a strategy for racism. It is the strategy. And I said, no, it's one of the strategies because it's going to take more than a group of people, right? More than a strategy to fix this broken world. By the way, we have everything we need. It's already part of our DNA. We just have to figure out and be faithful enough to say, as hard as this gets, I'm in it for the long haul. I want to leave my children better than the world they were born in. And that's my obligation to them and to my community. So it starts with community. So this segment that I live in, I've got neighbors. I got to start with my neighbors. And if everyone starts with their neighbors in their communities, all of a sudden these dots start to connect. And there's this beautiful mosaic that shows up before us. And it looks like people who care, have deep levels of compassion. And compassion is missing in our world. The other thing that is deeply embedded in us is ignorance. And we've got a great deal of ignorance that we've got to dispose of. And it's going to take time for that to be deconstructed.
Well, we are out of time today. But this has been amazing. there are so many things that I've written down, so many things I want to think about. Pastor Stephen Handy from McKendree United Methodist Church, thank you for being our guest. Lots of things to think about from the conversation. Your service is, what time do you all start on Sunday mornings?
We start at 10 o'clock, and what we have part of this transformation, right? Coming into this COVID moment, we changed a whole lot of things, and we realized that you don't have to be in church for 2 hours. You don't have to be in church for an hour and a half. You don't have to be in church for an hour. It's what's the content is more important than the time.
Yeah.
So I see a message. Karen, let's talk. We're looking to be in Antioch with a micro community, and we'd love for you to be a part of that. We believe that these micro communities, beyond the gathering of 2,000 or 3,000 people, can change the face of the earth, because Jesus met with small groups and not large groups.
A lot of people may be showing up, and a lot of people may be calling you as well. Thank you for being our guest. I'm going to go look over the list, and I'll be calling you. All right. Our guest next week is Shawnee Dow, who is the founder of a tech company that works with schools. It's called POSSIP, and she received a tremendous amount of funding for this concept, and we'll talk to her about that next week. So I hope everybody has a great week. I hope the world somehow stabilizes, but think about what Stephen said. And if you have questions, you can certainly send them in to us, and then we'll get them to Stephen. Again, everybody be safe. Have a really good rest of the weekend. Have a good week ahead. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Blessings.